That stupid sister of mine thinks she is a savior? Paying for my dress is the only good thing she has ever done. Her money is my money, her stuff is my stuff. Those words drifted through the bridal suite door while my mother just giggled. I looked down at my banking app. $0. I didn't say a word. I just set the heavy steamer on the floor and walked away. My risk auditor brain had already made the decision. The ceremony was starting in 30 minutes. I wasn't going to attend. I was going to liquidate. Have you ever been the ATM for a family that treats you like a servant? Tell me your story in the comments. To understand why I didn't scream, you have to understand what I sacrificed to be standing in that hallway. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a specialist's office in downtown Seattle, staring at an invoice that made my stomach turn. $60,000. That was the price tag to fix the chronic pain condition that had made walking feel like stepping on broken glass for the last 3 years. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was life-altering. I had spent 5 years saving for that moment. I am a 28-year-old risk auditor. My entire life is built on calculating probabilities and mitigating losses. I didn't take vacations. I drove a 10-year-old sedan that rattled when it hit 40 miles per hour. I ate instant noodles for dinner more nights than I care to admit. Every spare dollar went into a high-yield savings account labeled Health Fund. When the doctor handed me the surgery schedule, I finally felt like I could breathe. I was going to be pain-free. I was going to get my life back. Then my phone rang. It was my father, Kenneth. He wasn't just crying, he was hyperventilating. I had never heard him like that. He told me he was in trouble. Serious legal trouble. He mentioned loan sharks, a business deal gone wrong, and the terrifying possibility of federal prison if he didn't come up with $60,000 by the end of the week. He begged. He pleaded. He used the one weapon he knew I couldn't defend against. His role as the helpless father who had done his best. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the medical center, my hand hovering over the banking app. My auditor brain screamed that the numbers didn't add up. Why 60,000 exactly? Why no? But my daughter brain, the part of me conditioned to be the safety net, overrode the logic. I told myself that money could be earned again, but a father couldn't be replaced. With a shaking finger, I transferred the entire balance of my health fund to his account. I called the doctor's office and canceled my surgery. I went home and ate noodles, telling myself I had done the right thing. I had saved my family. 2 days later, I went to my parents' house to check on him. The house was empty. On the kitchen counter, buried under a stack of junk mail, I saw a piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It wasn't a court summons. It wasn't a notice from a loan shark. It was a receipt. A non-refundable venue deposit for the diamond package at a private island resort. The cost was exactly $60,000. The date on the receipt was 1 hour after I had wired the money. I stood there in the silent kitchen, holding the paper that proved my pain had paid for my sister's vanity. He hadn't been in legal trouble. He hadn't been facing prison. He had just been short on the deposit for Rachel's dream wedding, and he knew I was the only one with liquidity. That was the moment the daughter died and the auditor took over. I didn't confront them. I didn't call to scream. I realized that to them I wasn't a person with needs or pain. I was just an insurance policy they could cash out whenever they wanted. They thought they had gotten away with it because I went quiet. They didn't realize that in my line of work, silence doesn't mean acceptance. It means I'm building a case. The theft didn't stop with the $60,000. That was just the down payment on their entitlement. Over the next few weeks, I watched my family operate with the confidence of people who had never been told no. Rachel treated my apartment like her personal free boutique. She had an emergency key just in case, but the only emergency seemed to be her wardrobe. I would come home from a 10-hour shift auditing corporate ledgers to find gaps in my closet where my best blazers used to be. My high-end skincare, the few luxuries I allowed myself, would vanish from the bathroom counter. When I confronted her about a missing $300 serum, she didn't even deny it. She just rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, Maya. Sisters share. Besides, you just go to work and come home. Who are you trying to impress?" He was right. I didn't go out. I was too busy working to refill the savings account they had drained. But hearing her dismiss my life while wearing my clothes was a specific kind of violence. It wasn't just greed. It was the assumption that my things were naturally hers because I was naturally less important. She saw me as a resource to be mined, not a person to be respected. Then came the contracts. Kenneth and Eleanor stopped by on a Sunday, not to ask how I was managing my pain without the surgery, but to shove a catering contract in my face. "The caterer is being difficult about our credit check," my father said, waving a hand as if his credit score wasn't a disaster of his own making. "We just need you to co-sign as a guarantor. It is just a formality. We are a family, right? We help each other." I looked at the document. It wasn't a formality. It was a liability clause for another $15,000. If they didn't pay, and I knew they wouldn't, the bill would come straight to me. I almost laughed. They had already taken my health. Now they wanted to mortgage my future credit. But the breaking point wasn't the money. It was a piece of paper I found on the dining table while they were looking for a pen. It was the draft seating chart for the reception. I scanned the top tables. The head table, Rachel, groom parents. Table 1, the groom's wealthy family. Table 2, Rachel's influencer friends. I kept looking, moving further and further down the list until I found my name. I was at table 19. It was located in the back corner, right next to the swinging doors of the service kitchen and the DJ's speaker stack. I was seated with the wedding photographer's assistant and the off-duty band members. I wasn't listed as sister of the bride. I was placed in the overflow section, hidden away like a dirty secret at a party I had single-handedly funded. That was the moment the last thread of daughterly guilt snapped. I looked at Kenneth, who was tapping the contract impatiently. I looked at Rachel, who was scrolling through her phone, indifferent to my existence. I realized then that I wasn't a member of this family. I was their insurance policy. I was the safety net they walked on to keep their shoes clean. I spent my life auditing strangers, finding the rot in corporate books, yet I had missed the fraud living in my own house because I was too close to the data. I picked up the pen. I didn't sign the catering contract. I realized that if I screamed or fought, they would just gaslight me, call me crazy, and cut me off before I could get my money back. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the auditor. I will handle this, Dad, I said, my voice steady and cold. In fact, why don't I handle all the vendor contracts? You shouldn't have to worry about the paperwork. Kenneth looked relieved. He thought he had won again. He didn't know that by handing me the paperwork he was handing me the weapon. I wasn't going to save them. I was preparing to collect the debt. The next day I initiated the Trojan horse protocol. In my line of work we have a saying, the most dangerous breach doesn't come from a hacker kicking down the firewall. It comes from someone holding the door open for a delivery guy. I decided to be the delivery guy. I walked into my parents' living room with a smile that felt like plastic and a stack of documents 3 inches thick. Kenneth was pacing, nursing a scotch at 11 in the morning. His credit cards had been declined by the luxury caterer, and he was spiraling. I fixed it, Dad, I said, setting the papers on the coffee table. I spoke to the vendors. They just need a guarantor. I agreed to co-sign everything so the wedding can go forward. He slumped onto the sofa, the relief washing over him so visibly it was pathetic. Thank God. I knew you would step up, Maya. You are the practical one. There is one condition, I said, keeping my voice light. Since I am putting my credit on the line for $50,000 of catering, I need to secure my position. Standard procedure. I brought a notary, just a colleague from work, to witness the signatures. It is mostly liability waivers for the venue. I introduced Dave, a mobile notary I had hired an hour ago. Kenneth barely looked at him. I handed my father a pen. The stack of papers was real: vendor contracts, liability releases, insurance forms. But sandwiched in the middle on page 42 was a document titled Deed in lieu of foreclosure, attached to a commercial security agreement. The terms were brutal but simple. I was lending him the $60,000 retroactively classified as a secured loan plus the catering guarantee. The collateral was the house. If he missed the payment deadline, which was yesterday, title transferred to me immediately. This is a lot of reading, Kenneth grumbled, flipping a page without looking at it. Just standard boilerplate, Dad. Unless you want to call the caterer and explain why you can't pay. He signed. He signed the catering contract. He signed the waivers. And then, with a flourish of his expensive fountain pen, he signed the deed to his house over to me. Dave stamped it. The house was mine. Kenneth poured another drink, thinking he had just swindled his daughter into paying his bills. He didn't know he had just signed his eviction notice. Phase 2 was Rachel. That evening she stormed into my apartment while I was packing. My hair is a disaster, she announced, looking at her reflection in my hallway mirror. The salon fried it. Looks dull. I need something high-end. She started rummaging through my bathroom cabinets. I watched her, leaning against the doorframe. I knew exactly what she was looking for. There was a jar of imported limited edition hair mask on the counter. It retailed for $200. It was the only thing I owned that she hadn't stolen yet. Greed is a reflex. I have learned that you don't have to force a rat to eat cheese. You just have to leave it out and make sure it smells expensive. I knew Rachel. If I offered it to her, she would be suspicious. If I tried to hide it, she would want it more. Don't touch that, I said, feigning annoyance. I am saving it for myself. You, she scoffed, grabbing the jar. Maya, you are sitting at the back table. No one is going to look at your hair. I am the bride. I need this. She didn't open it to check the consistency. If she had, she might have noticed it was a little runnier than usual. I had emptied the expensive product and replaced it with a mixture of cheap leave-in conditioner and a high-concentration UV-reactive compound. It wasn't dye that you wash out. It was a styling cream meant to be left in for a glossy finish. It dried completely invisible. But under the specific wavelength of a black light, it would glow like radioactive waste. Fine, I said, letting out a sigh of defeat. Just make sure the stylist applies it thoroughly. It needs to coat every strand to really shine. Obviously, she said, clutching the jar like a trophy. Thanks for finally being useful. She walked out the door with the chemical bomb in her hand. I locked the door behind her, picked up the notarized deed and filed it in my briefcase. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for the lights to go out. The wedding day arrived with the kind of aggressive sunshine that rich people pay extra for. The private island resort was beautiful, I will give them that. A sprawling compound of white stone and glass surrounded by water so blue it looked dyed. But beauty wasn't the point, isolation was. To get here, guests had to take a 40-minute ferry ride. There was no cell service, just the resort's Wi-Fi network, which I knew was spotty at best. Once you were on the island, you were trapped in paradise. Perfect. I arrived early, dressed in the navy gown I had bought off a clearance rack, the one Rachel had called depressing during the rehearsal. I went straight to the administration office. Mr. Sterling, the resort manager, looked up from his tablet, his face arranging itself into a professional smile. Ms. Maya, he said. We were not expecting you until the ceremony. I like to verify my investments, Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice low. I just want to confirm that the wire transfer for the rush fee cleared. 3 days ago, when Kenneth's card had declined for the final venue payment, I hadn't just lent him the cash. I had paid the resort directly. I had signed the addendum. Sterling tapped his screen. It did. $25,000 received Tuesday. You are listed here as the primary account holder for the event. The contract is in your name. And the default clause? I asked. The one regarding immediate liquidation of services if the balance is not settled by the reception start time? It is standard policy, he assured me. Though I assume your father will handle the remaining bar tab? I am sure he intends to, I said. But keep your team on standby. Just in case. I walked out of the office feeling the weight of the notarized deed in my clutch. It was heavy like a loaded gun. I found Rachel in the garden, posing for photos. She looked radiant. Her dress was a cloud of silk and lace, costing more than my first car. But my eyes went straight to her hair. It was sleek, glossy, and perfectly styled. The stylist had done exactly what Rachel demanded, slathered on the high-end cream and sealed it with heat. To the naked eye, she looked like a magazine cover. To me, she looked like a walking target. Finally, she snapped when she saw me. Try not to stand too close to me during the photos. That dress is tragic. You look like a bruise. You look glowing, I said. I know, she flipped her hair, the invisible chemicals catching the sunlight. See? I told you I needed the good stuff. You were just going to waste it on your split ends. Kenneth cornered me near the bar 10 minutes later, sweating through his tux. He dragged me behind a floral arch and whispered that his credit card had been flagged for fraud and asked me to cover the open bar hold. I smiled and told him I had already handled everything. Relieved, he walked off, never realizing I hadn't paid a cent. I had only started the clock. I slipped into the AV booth, flashed my ID and ownership contract, and lied about testing the bride's requested neon rave lighting cue. The technician hit the switch, flooding the booth in purple UV. Perfect. When the music dropped, I wanted it brutal. Back in the hall, Rachel took the mic, praising sacrifice and kindness while wearing a $40,000 dress funded by my pain and my credit. From the shadows, I watched her order the DJ to hit the lights. The ballroom went black. Then the bass slammed, and the UV lights exploded on. White shirts glowed violet. Teeth flashed purple. And in the center of the floor, Rachel's head blazed neon green and orange. The stolen chemical dye in her hair reacted violently, streaking down her neck and staining her gown. Gasps turned to laughter as sorority sisters shouted that it looked like dorm anti-theft dye. Rachel spun, oblivious, until she saw her reflection. She screamed, clawing at her hair, only smearing glowing stains across her face. Kenneth stormed in, demanding answers. Phones rose everywhere as influencers filmed. The party had become content. When Kenneth threatened lawsuits, the resort manager calmly informed him that he wasn't the client. I was. At my instruction, the staff shut down the event and repossessed everything. Food, bar, band, rentals. Rachel shrieked that it was her wedding. It was, I said. Until you defaulted. Kenneth told me to get out of his house. I placed the deed he'd signed on the table. His $60,000 loan had matured yesterday. The title transferred that morning. He had 24 hours to vacate. I walked out while they melted down. Outside, my grandmother waited in a town car. Did it work? She asked. Liquidation complete. Rachel tried to spin the story, but security footage proved she stole the dye. #glowing thief bride trended for days. Sponsors vanished. My parents were evicted 2 days later. I sold the house to a developer, paid for my surgery, and launched my own auditing firm, specializing in asset recovery for financial abuse victims. My family thought I was their safety net. They forgot that sometimes the asset gets liquidated. Subscribe if you believe in reading the fine print. 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 Reading the fine print.